It's a profound honor for me to stand in this pulpit on Rosh Hashanah morning, surrounded by so many members of the North Hills Jewish community, of Temple Ohav Shalom, and to have the privilege of welcoming so many distinguished guests, elected officials, local leaders, administrators, educators who are with us this morning as we inaugurate the Jewish New Year 5785. I'm grateful for your presence today and look forward to the opportunity to come to know each of you who have joined us here in the year ahead, and want you to know that you are always welcome here. It's also a very special privilege for me to introduce to this congregation and to all of you my friend and our speaker this morning, Justice David Wecht. Justice Wecht has served with distinction on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court since 2016. His exceptional legal career, which spans notable roles on the Superior Court and Court of Common Pleas, has been defined by his unwavering dedication to the rule of law and his commitment to improving our judiciary through meaningful reforms. A summa cum laude graduate of Yale University and thereafter Yale Law School, where he served as the editor of the Yale Law Journal, Justice Wecht's contributions to the legal field extend far beyond the courtroom. A frequent lecturer across the country and around the world, including Israel and China, Justice Wecht has shared his profound knowledge of American jurisprudence and deep commitment to justice with students and scholars the world over. But beyond his impressive legal acumen and accomplishments, Justice Wecht has also been a passionate and public champion of the State of Israel, particularly in these recent days of peril. His steadfast support for Israel's right to exist and defend itself is unwavering, as is his voice in the fight against anti-Semitism. Justice Wecht has been a spirited advocate against this ancient pernicious hatred, recognizing not only its deep historical roots, but also its recent disturbing resurgence in our own time. Tragically, anti-Semitism, which has become all too present in our country's current climate, now defines too much of the experience of Jews in America today. And Justice Wecht's crystal clear vision and consistent courage in calling attention to these urgent issues have made him an extraordinary role model for this and future generations. Truly, he exemplifies what it means to live as a proud Jew, one who lives his values publicly and with conviction. This morning, we are incredibly fortunate to be able to hear from Justice Wecht on the timely and important topic, anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred in a new year. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wecht, Justice Wecht, my friend, to our pulpit. Terrific. Really glad to have you here. Thank you.
Wow, anything I could say after such a wonderful introduction is necessarily anticlimactic. I'm honored to be here. I'm of course not a rabbi, not an academic, and distinctly unqualified to give a Dvar Torah. I suppose this is some commentary. It certainly doesn't qualify as anything divine. I have never had the privilege of being in your beautiful shul. I got special permission to visit from Adat Shalom today, and it's so nice to be here. I remember years ago at an APAC conference getting to know Rabbi Donsky and hearing about your shul, and this is the first time I've managed to get here. I don't have a good excuse, especially since my wife comes from McCandless and my mother lives in McCandless. Well, here I am, an honor to be here. And Rabbi Bisno asked me to speak about an old hatred in this new year. And we just read about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And this Parsha has so much to offer, and as the rabbi said, this was a test for Avraham, and in those days, of course, the Canaanites, Goyei Haratzot, the peoples of the land, engaged in certain abominable practices. Sacrifice of the children occasionally was one of them, and in fact, many of our Levitical laws, our chukim, our mitzvot, are framed in order to set us apart from some of these abominable practices. The thing that struck me as I was thinking about what I could say to you today about this Parsha was a word that Abraham mentioned 3 times in that parsha. And I know some of you are thinking, what was that word? And some of you are remembering what that word was because it's so resonant. That word was hineni. Hineni. Here I am. Here I am. The first time Avraham says hineni is when God calls him. Here I am. The second time is when his son calls him and he says, hineni, here I am. And the third time is when the angel calls him to tell him, do not slaughter your son. And Abraham says, hineni. And Rashi tells us that this word, hineni, is the sign of a pious man, a person that today we would call a stand-up person, a person who does not seek to avoid his or her responsibility. And remember, Abraham was not born a Jew. He came from Ur of the Chaldees, in what's now Iraq. And God said, Lech lecha, go. And he crossed over. He crossed over the Fertile Crescent, and that's why we're called the Ivrim, the Hebrews, from the word la'avor, because we crossed over. That's how we became the Hebrews. So Abraham did not ignore, he did not hide from God, he did not run away like Jonah did at first. He answered God's call, and he went to a place that I will show you. He took 3 days to get from Hebron. He didn't come from Tel Aviv, by the way. He came from Hebron in Yehudah, right? Nothing in our Bible happened in Tel Aviv, but a lot happened in Yehudah and Shomron. And it took him 3 days to get from Hebron to Yerushalayim. And maybe he was dragging his feet a little. Maybe he was waiting for that angel of God to say, just kidding. Just kidding. And on the third day, he saw Eretz Moriah, the land of Moriah, Mount Moriah. Some of you have been there. We call it Har HaBayit. The rock on which Abraham bound Isaac is on Har HaBayit, on the Temple Mount. That's the holy place. We just sung about Hishtakavu lahar kadsho. Bow to the holy mountain. You just sang that before we read the Torah portion. That's the holy mountain, and that's the first thing in the Tanakh that happens in that critically important place. I'll return to this theme of hineni. All of you, by being here on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, you are all saying hineni. Here you are. You didn't have to be here. Nobody was probably checking on you. And here you are on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Each and every one of you has in your own way said, hineni, here I am. And again, the rabbi asked me to speak about Jew hatred. By the way, as the rabbi mentioned, this term anti-Semitism, it's a new term. It came up in the latter half of the 19th century. Some German crackpot wanted a term to curse us with, and he came up with antisemitismus, and it stuck. Before it was always hating the Jews, right? Judenfrage, but he came up with this anti-Semitism, and it stuck. And the reason I don't use the term that much, although inevitably I use the term anti-Semitism like we all do, but the reason it's a bit of a malapropism is that, as everybody in the room knows, there are a whole lot of Semites, and we are just a very, very small portion of the Semites. So you see, it's an ill-fitting label. Anyway, this phenomenon of Jew hatred is, as everybody knows, not a new thing. It's not a new thing. And Abraham walked the earth about 4,000 years ago or so, give or take. 2,000 years before a Galilean Jew named Yeshua, Jesus walked the earth. And 3,600 years before an Arabian, Muhammad, walked the earth. Even before Jesus or Muhammad, even before their followers begun Christianity and Islam, there was hatred of Jews. You may not be that familiar with it. But it already existed. We were always resented for our particularity. Just imagine the strangeness with which the Canaanites viewed Abraham, this guy, starting this new practice, right? And our particularity was always resented. You read yesterday at the end of the Torah portion about how Abraham made a pact with Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, at Beersheba, the well of the oath, right? So many of you have been to Beersheba, right? And so there was always a tension. And in ancient Egypt, long before Jesus and long before Muhammad, in ancient Egypt, the Jews were viewed with suspicion. And this won't surprise you, right? Because think about our bondage in Egypt, which we've been reading about in the Torah. Ancient Greece, ancient Rome. And then before the Hebrews crossed into the promised land, Balak of Moab sent Balaam to curse the children of Israel, to curse them. Now, ultimately, he could not curse them. Ultimately, he looked out and he said, Ma tovu olecha Yaakov, mishkanatecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. But along the way, he noticed something. He said that the children of Israel were Am livadad yishkon, a people that will dwell unto themselves. This is the same notion of particularity, which is resented. It's resented. It's that same insistence on our own identity. The reason we're still here as Jews in the year 5785 of the Hebrew calendar. Of course, with the advent of Christianity, and by the way, of course, Shaul, a Jew from Tarsus, it's just now in Syria, Shaul had his vision on the road to Damascus and became St. Paul. Paul and other early church fathers couldn't blame the Romans because the Romans were big and mighty and powerful. So who are you going to blame? Blame those Jews about whom people were already suspicious. And then we all know in our kishkis, the legacy of Jew hatred over the 2 millennia, the reason that many of your grandparents, like my grandparents, left Eastern Europe and came here. The Crusades, the pogroms, the Khmelnytsky massacres, and ultimately the Shoah, perpetrated by an anti-Christian Nazi regime, but still perpetrated in the heart of Christendom, and without the Jew hatred of 2,000 years of Christian hostility to Jews, could not have ever taken root. This is why the Lithuanians and the Ukrainians who lived with my paternal grandmother and paternal grandfather before they came here helped the Germans kill our people in places like Babi Yar and Ponari and the camps. The Jews also did not only reject Jesus, they also refused to accept Muhammad as the holy prophet of God. And that's why That's why the Bani Koreza and other Jewish tribes in Arabia, yes, there were Jewish Arabs. There were Jewish Arabs. There's still Jewish Arabs in a way. If you spend time in Israel, you could still hear Ivrit b'mifta Aravit. You could still hear Hebrew being spoken with an Arabic accent by Israelis who were born and raised in Arab countries. So many of our brothers and sisters in Israel are Jewish Arabs. There were Jewish Arabs and Christian Arabs and pagan Arabs before there were Muslim Arabs. And the Jews of the Hejaz did not accept Muhammad. And of course, there's been an enormous amount of Islamic hostility to Jews since that time. So this sense of hostility has dissipated in some quarters of Christianity and Islam. And of course, we as Jews owe much to the blessed memory of Pope John with Vatican II, right? But the war on Jew hatred is, of course, far from over, as recent events have reminded us. The past is the past. I now want to talk about the present, and after that, I'll close with thoughts about the future. The present in Israel and the present in the Galut, in the diaspora, is fraught. It is full of Jew hatred. In January, I spent a couple weeks in Israel. I was teaching at a law school where I teach. Some of you have been to Herzliya, I'm sure. There's a wonderful university called Reichman University. I have had the privilege of teaching at their law school, and I'll be back in August. In any event, in January, I was there for a couple weeks, and I had the tzchut, I had the merit of visiting Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope, the communities that had been ravaged by the terrorists just a few months before, on October 7 and October 8. And I was in near Oz and Re'im and other places along the border. And it's beyond the scope of this talk to tell you about all my impressions and experiences there. But I just want you to understand that nothing like this has ever been seen since the Holocaust. And this was in the Jewish state, where terrorists had come in, murdered, raped, kidnapped, and mutilated Jews, and also some non-Jews. There were several Thai workers, for example, at Nir Oz who were murdered and some taken hostage, and they're still there. And the terrorists were so determined. And by the way, there weren't only Hamas, quote, soldiers, unquote. There were also waves of civilians who came in and participated in the butchery and the looting after the first Hamas commandos came in. And I was given tours of homes in these communities where the terrorists had ripped the gas line out and ignited the line so that the house would catch on fire and blow up, and so that the Jews hiding in the mamadim, in the safe room, would have the choice to either burn and asphyxiate in the safe room or come out and be slaughtered. And you know the war goes on. The brave young men and women of Tzahal, the Israeli Defense Forces, fight on in Gaza and now in Lebanon. And 9 young men died in the last couple days in South Lebanon. And when you have time, you should read about them and read about their lives and their prospects. There's not a friend or family member of mine in Israel who doesn't know somebody who has been killed in terror attacks or battle or both. Not a single one. Just the other day, I got a photo from a good friend of mine who practices law in Jerusalem. He's an American like all of you, but he and his wife made Aliyah over 25 years ago. And he sent me this photo. And at first I didn't know what I was seeing. It was like something metallic. And I said, what is this? And in one photo, this piece of metal was sitting on a table that I immediately recognized from his backyard where he and I had been sitting together in January. Well, last Saturday, when he and his family were in a lot on Shabbat, a Houthi missile that had been intercepted by the IDF over the Jordanian desert had split into shrapnel. This is probably 75 miles away, perhaps, in the air. And the rain of shrapnel came all the way to his backyard in Jerusalem. And Americans, Jews, Christians, Muslims, whatever non-religious people, Americans, it's very hard for us to understand the reality with which Israelis, Jews, Muslims, Christians, others live every single day. Now, in this country, of course, we all know, because we read about, right, or we see on the news, the epidemic of Jew hatred. Some of you, like me, have kids in college or grad school. I've got 3 in law school, one in her last year of college. And there's an epidemic of Jew hatred on the campuses. You've read or heard about the horrible things that have happened at Pitt, where I teach every week at Pitt. And of course, I'm sure you have seen and read about what's happened on the Pitt campus. And on the streets of our nation, mobs celebrate the attacks on Jews, celebrate the murder of Jews, and even call for the murder of Jews. And this is one thing on which the extreme right and the extreme left agree. They hate us. That's the only thing, that's the only common denominator between many of these groups. Could be extreme right, could be like the guy who murdered 11 Jews in Tree of Life, where my wife and I were married and where I had served on the board previously. We know that guy was an extreme right-wing nut, right? And many of us knew some of the 11 Jews who were murdered that day, as I did. This extreme right is what Dara Horn, the great author of many articles and books, including Everyone Loves Dead Jews, which I recommend for you to read. She calls that extreme right-wing violent anti-Semitism Purim anti-Semitism, because it's like Haman in the book of Esther, right? Wanting to kill all the Jews with violence. And then we have the extreme left Jew hatred. You see this on the campuses. You see this with the recycling, the amazing recycling of KGB propaganda about how the Jews are the capitalists. Maybe they use the code word Zionist. You know, from the service we just had, we talk about Zion all the time. We Jews are from Zion. We are Zionists. Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. We pray to Zion every time we pray. So the anti-Zionist, the anti-Jewish anarchist, the anti-Jewish socialists, the anti-Jewish Jews, these are people who are hating us as passionately as the right-wing extremists. They are what Dara Horn called the Chanukah Jew haters. Why? Because like the Seleucids in the Chanukah story, they want to Hellenize us, so to speak. They want to force us to give up our identity. They want to force us to give up our identity. They resent us for our particularity. And by the way, this faction, it's more than a faction, this sector of extreme left Jew hatred is not so nonviolent itself. And you've seen the kind of mobs on the streets and on the campuses. And another phenomenon, of course, is the jihad. The jihad, the open call for slaughter of Jews by jihadists. You've seen this for years in the streets of Europe. Now you're seeing it in our country. Now you're seeing it in our country. And of course, we still have the Farrakhan phenomenon, right? Which has appealed to many in the African American community, Kanye West and people like that. So we have, and you see the results of that on the streets of Brooklyn, right? So we're up against supremacists among whites, supremacists among blacks, supremacists among Muslims, right, left, center, red-green alliance. We're up against it. And I'll have some thoughts about how to confront this. The bottom line about this hatred is Jew hatred is protean. It's not about anything we do. It is shape-shifting. We can be capitalists to them. We can be communists to them. We can be weaklings to them. Or we can be muscular brutes to them, right? We'll be whatever they want to demonize. We are the foil. We are the hated ones. And it is protean. And one more thing about the present before I turn to some thoughts about the future is that for all the slaughters of the Jews throughout history, culminating in the worst one, right, the Shoah, 6 million of our brothers and sisters, and all those other massacres over the millennia, the Khmelnytsky massacres, the pogroms, the crusades. We've lost millions, right, through the cherev, through the sword. We just read about who shall die by the sword, who shall die by this way. But you know what? We've lost more Jews. We've lost more Jews over all these centuries by people just drifting away. Just quietly, in most cases. Sometimes noisily, like some of these anti-Jewish groups that, you read about attacking us. I'm not even going to talk about their names. You know who you read about them, especially on these campus activities. But mostly quietly, and mostly with no evil in the heart, but it's just easier just to melt away, right? Just to who wants to make the effort, right? It takes, see, in the galut, in the diaspora, unlike in Israel, it takes an affirmative effort to be a Jew. You all know that. It took you an effort to be here today, right? You could have been doing something else. And that's a minor example. There are many other examples. But the easy way is just to drift away. And each of us has friends or acquaintances who have done so. Again, it's not out of a spirit of evil, but think about this statistic. Now, as we end the year 5784 and begin the year 5785, we're only about 15.8 million Jews in the world. That's smaller than the population of Mexico City. Right? 15.8 million Jews in the world. And on the eve of the Shoah, before the Holocaust, we were 18 million. Think about that. This is 80 years later, and we've seen the birth and the rebirth and the growth and the development of Israel in that time. And even with that, and by the way, more Jews live in Israel now than anywhere in the world. And Baruch Hashem, by the end of this calendar year, there will be 10 million Israelis. Not all Jews, 75% or so Jews. Think about that. But in all that time since the Shoah, we're still less than we were before the Shoah. Think about that. And most people who are no longer with us have not been subjected to violence. They have just drifted away. Rashi says that in the Tanakh, it says when we left Egypt, the Hebrews, that we left chamushim. Some of you recognize the root of that, chamesh, 5, right? So most scholars interpret that to mean chamushim, we left armed. And of course, we would need arms in the desert to fight the Amalekites and many others. But Rashi says, no, that's not what the Tanakh means when it says chamushim there. It means that 4/5 of the Hebrews stayed in Egypt. They turned back there at the Sea of Reeds. They went back into Egypt and were lost to our people. And in every generation, this phenomenon continues. So some thoughts about the future. And again, I'm inspired, and I hope you're inspired by Abraham's word, hineni. Here I am. In 1915, Louis Brandeis, who a year later would become the first Jew to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, gave a noted speech in Boston. And he said, to become better Americans, we must become better Jews. And to become better Jews, we must become Zionists. And that spirit of pride is as important today as it was in the time of Louis Brandeis. The attacks on Israel that you see in the news media, that you read in the paper, that you see in these vicious, farcical op-eds, and social media, my heavens, that's a whole nother ball game. Their attacks, they read, right, as attacks on the Jewish state. But make no mistake, they're really an attack on us as diaspora Jews. Baruch Hashem, in Israel, there is an IDF. And as you know, Israel has learned the lessons of the Shoah. There will never be another Shoah. There will never be Jewish powerlessness. But we in the Galut are proud of the IDF, but we're not defended by the IDF. And the attacks on Israel are an attack on each and every one of you who is a Jew, and don't pretend otherwise. Now, there are two things I want to say before I close about dealing with this. The first one is inward looking, and the second one is outward looking. First, inward looking. The best answer to the Jew haters is to be more Jewish, to do more Jewish, to be loud and proud about being Jewish, to educate our young, to teach them to know our history, teach them some Ivrit, teach them our traditions. Some of you are parents and grandparents. Send your children on trips to Israel, your grandchildren. Consider Jewish day school. Consider Jewish summer camps. We just read in the prayers the words, Tivnei Chomot Yerushalayim, rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Well, Yerushalayim Havnuyah, Jerusalem is rebuilt. Go visit it, be a part of it, experience it. And remember that the three pillars upon which our lives as Jews are built are Torat Yisrael, Am Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael, the Torah of Israel, the people of Israel, which is all of us, and the land of Israel. And the best answer to the hatred directed against us is Achdut, unity. Klal Yisrael, all of Israel, all Jews. Ahavat Yisrael, the love of all Jews. Not hating each other because this one is this minhag, this one's Orthodox, this one's conservative, this one's Reform, or this one's this party or that party, and all this nonsense. So we should make sure that we exhibit pride in our own heritage and invest in the education of our children, because we don't want our children and our grandchildren drifting away from the Jewish people. And it takes an effort. It takes content. It takes chinuch, education. You can't be a Jew by default in the galut. If you want to be a Jew by default, that's great. Then make aliyah, which is a great mitzvah, of course. And you could be a Jew by default. Shmuel Rossner has a great book I recommend. It's called Jewsraelis. Jewsraelis. You can be a Jew by default in Eretz Yisrael, right? Because the calendar, the everything, the argot, everything is Jewish. That's the majority stream. We're a minority here. You have to make an effort. And even if you think, I'm good, you got it, you're solid where you are, think about your children. Think about your grandchildren and those that will follow them. Think about what will be necessary for them to have in their own identity and their own knowledge and their own pride to be sitting in a shul as you are sitting today. Think about that. Think about what's necessary. And then the last thing is outward looking, and it's about getting involved. Other communities, other faiths, other creeds, other ethnicities don't hesitate to stand up for their rights, to assert themselves, to be proud in their own identity and demand respect in the public sphere. Too many Jews, not you, but too many Jews in the diaspora demand respect for others without demanding respect for themselves. We should demand both. And truly, before we can respect others, we need to respect ourselves. And anyone who doesn't respect himself or herself is not going to get the respect of others. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov wrote, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar ma'od va'ikar lo lefached klal. All the world is like a narrow bridge, and the main thing is not to be afraid of anything. Or as one of Eyal Golan's songs says, Am ha'netzach le'olam lo mefached. The eternal people is never afraid. If you want respect, you have to assert yourself. So it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican or independent or whatever. It doesn't matter if you're right wing or left wing or whatever. Get out there and demand respect for the Jewish people. Be proud of yourself. So I think too many Jews over the years have felt they have to hide their Jewish identity. I don't know where that comes from. It's foreign to me. I think it's pathetic. But beyond being pathetic, forget that, it's counterproductive. Nobody respects weakness. People may say they love the meek, that they love the weak, but it's not true. People despise weakness, and if you exhibit the slightest bit of self-contempt, you will be treated with contempt. So get involved and demand, whatever party you are, whatever candidates you want to support, maybe be a candidate yourself by heavens, get involved and do something. Maybe you're the person to run for office. Maybe your spouse or your loved one or your friend is, and stand up for the Jewish people. We have nothing to be ashamed of. And remember what Rabbi Tarfon said. He said, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo hivatel imenu. It's not up to you to finish the work, but you're not free to desist from it. So I encourage all of you to encourage those close to you who are Jews to be proud of their Jewish identity. Again, it takes an affirmative act. It takes an affirmative act. And there are some of you, by the way, here, whether here today or in your kahila overall, who are Jews by choice, and I salute you. My mother is a Jew by choice. My mother was born a Lutheran in Norway. She lived the first 6 years of her life under German occupation, came here after the war, enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, where she met my father, who was serving in the U.S. Air Force, converted and married him. My wife is a convert. One of my sisters-in-law is a convert. we welcome Jews by choice. Ruth in the Bible was a Jew by choice. Regardless, never apologize. And I just want to close by quoting something written by Zev Jabotinsky in 1911. And the excerpt I'll read says the following, quote, "We have nothing to apologize for. We are a people just like all peoples. We are not obliged to give account to anyone. We are not sitting for an exam, and no one is entitled to demand an answer from us for any charge he wishes to direct our way. We were here before them, and we will be leaving after them. We are fine just the way we are. We will not be any different, nor do we want to be." That's a long way of saying Hineni. I hope you will all take the Hineni spirit with you. Shana Tova Umituka, a good and sweet year. Thank you.